Just before I get to our next guest, just a quick bulletin, and perhaps we can talk about it in the next hour of the show. H. Ross Perot, who twice ran for president of the United States back in the 1990s, has passed away. Just got the bulletin a short time ago. 8:34. We're at 58. Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. Thanks for joining us on Magic Valley this morning. A great many people in the Teton School District got to bed late last night. That was because there was a lengthy school board meeting. This comes back to a subject we've talked about over the last month on the air. We were talking about the name that the school is known by, its athletic teams, as well as perhaps some of its academic teams too, known as the Redskins, which is a name that has become, admittedly, somewhat controversial over the last quarter century. And one of the guests we talked with about this a couple of weeks ago was Doug Wilson. He's a parent in the district. He's got a son who graduated not long ago, and as I understand it, he still has a son in school. And Mr. Wilson is joining us again this morning on KLIX. And first of all, sir, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Good morning, Bill.
Last night's meeting, it was a long one from what I understand. I read the report out of the newspaper in Jackson this morning. Got the impression a lot of people at 11:15 were thinking it was time to go home.
Yeah, I got there pretty early because I wanted to make sure I was able to speak early, clearly, loudly, and make sure the board hasn't zoned out yet. I don't know what would keep them after 15 or 20 minutes of people talking at them, with them, for them. What would keep them from just shutting down? I think it's a horrible way to take public input, but I imagine it has to be done that way.
And they've delayed a vote. There's going to be a decision at least deferred for the time being.
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
Now, the story that I saw, the newspaper story, maybe it's just the online version that I looked at, was not quite 2 pages long, but I got the impression that a lot of the speakers were speaking against the name Redskins, and it mentions some of the tribal people who were there speaking, although it doesn't say some of the tribe is opposed. I got the impression that it's a blanket opposition by the Shoshone-Bannock tribe. Do you think that that's accurate?
I think it's the Shoshone-Bannock tribal leaders' agenda. It's not the decision or the choice of the Shoshone-Bannock people. On June 6th, when we had a meeting, at that point, Vice Chairman Lad Edmo showed up. Great gentleman, wonderful to speak with, and read portions of the Shoshone-Bannock position letter that basically calls out and denies any support for any team in Idaho with a native symbol or native name, such as the Teton Redskins, the Boise Braves, the Buell Indians, even the Pocatello Indians, in a county that's named after their tribe, Bannock County, in a city that's named after one of their chiefs, Pocatello, a high school named after one of their chiefs, Pocatello. They no longer support the Indian name. That's interesting to me. I wonder what happened to cause that. But in the same meeting on June 6th, Lad Edmo let us know that his desire all the way through school, through high school, and even into college was to play professional football for the Washington Redskins. So there's I assume there's the stance of their business council, which runs the tribe and handles all their business affairs and their governing affairs, and there's that of individuals. I can imagine they took an all or nothing stance because Pocatello's enjoyed their support since the mid-'70s when they got rid of their caricature of a Mohawk Indian. So, as I asked last night, I wonder what they did to be desensitized and to lose the support of the tribe that lives on their borders.
When is the vote actually scheduled to take place? That's a couple of weeks away?
I believe it's the 16th. There's supposed to be another working meeting on the 16th, and who knows if the vote will take place then. Several people let the board know that since this is going to be paid for with taxpayer money, taxpayers need to vote for it. They also reminded the board that the majority of the board was appointed and not elected, and the public doesn't feel that they're in the right position to make this decision on behalf of the constituents.
So we could be seeing this go to a public referendum versus a board vote, unlike what they saw in Cedar City, Utah.
Absolutely. And I honestly believe, after discussing with people, that the school board would rather that happen. They don't want to make the decision. They've said publicly that they'd rather the choice to change a name came from inside the schools, the students, the teachers, the staff. And fourth grade teacher sends out a poll because she's frustrated that the school board, took on this situation, brought it upon themselves to discuss it after it was suggested, and then tries to get somebody else to make the decision for them.
Well, Mr. Wilson, hold on to that thought for a moment. We'll take a short break. We've got more coming up. Doug Wilson is a parent in the Teton school system. And again, best way to put this is the school board punted last night on a name change from Redskins. More details coming up in just a few minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Cowley with you on Magic Valley this morning, and we're at 60 at 840. Doug Wilson is a parent in the Teton school system, and we're talking today. The school board had a meeting last night, a public hearing on the use of the name Redskins, mostly, of course, by the athletic programs at the school. And there's some opposition to that after 90 years. Again, it's been the name in use since 1929. And after 90 years, there is some opposition to its use. The school board, as he tells us, is planning to get back together a week from tonight, but may not necessarily vote on this and may turn this over to the public and have a public referendum. Bill Cowley with you on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, but we're at 60, coming up on 843 on Magic Valley this morning. Mr. Wilson, I gotta ask this question. We were talking off air about the meeting tone, and you were telling me it has been incredibly civil, which is not what you would call the normal way this has worked in other school systems.
No, it's not. I've spoken with folks from on both sides of the name change in Anderson High School in Cincinnati, Ohio. Spoken to both sides at Cedar City, Redmond, and it's the Teton Valley discussion, fight, battle has been quite civil. I don't get to read everything they say about me because I'm not, privy to what they say or think, but I've actually found it to be quite civil, especially from what I'm hearing from around different parts of the United States where this battle is taking place.
Of course, I think a lot of our impressions of this is that a lot of this has been driven by people who don't have very deep roots in the community. But that might be a bit of an oversimplification. I'm sure there are people who feel they want to do the right thing, and that the right thing is to do whatever you can do that might not offend someone somewhere at any particular time. And maybe that's why this has stayed civil, is because everyone realizes the other side isn't necessarily evil.
That's true. We all have our problems that we need to deal with. The Shoshone-Bannock specifically have their issues in their land and their people. We have ours. We have a huge overage of a budget for a construction bond that was passed. We're $2.4 million over budget, and we probably would have found out we were more over budget last night had they held that part of the meeting. We suffered a fraud in December, cost $785,000. Was with an email fraud for payment for the construction. The Native American people have incredibly high amounts of alcoholism, drug use. The suicide rate for Native Americans is 3.5 times that of the national average. 80% of Native American women suffer abuse, and the murder rate is at that rate also for Native American women. We all have problems that we need to look at, and we can't look outside of ourselves to find the solution. We're not causing that for the Native Americans, and changing the Redskin name isn't going to fix it.
Well, I look at this situation, and we have all these other issues, as you point out, that are much more complex. And yet, you go back to who is most impacted by all of this in the system, and it's the students. And I've got to imagine they would just like to see some sort of a resolution, and probably wonder, what's going on. I mean, we're here to do two things: get an education, and number two, if we can have some fun on the court or on the field, that's a wonderful thing. And they've got to be scratching their heads, I think, to some degree too, and asking how we got into all of this.
Absolutely. Most of the kids that I've talked to come from families that have been in the Valley and in that school system since it began. And they all grew up wanting to be Redskins, and now they are, and now they're wondering, am I going to be able to keep this up? Am I going to be able to play on the teams that's named the same as the one? I mean, for my family personally, my son's a junior in high school this year. His mom was a Teton Redskin. His grandfather's a Teton Redskin. His aunts and uncles all played on teams in various sports. And we looked back and found the first Murdoch graduated in 1931. So the entire line, you can't swing a dead cat in that valley without hitting a relative of mine, the Murdoch family. And they've graduated, and they've been in those schools since then as Redskins, wrestling, playing football, band, everything you can think of that could be an activity in school. This family has done it. Volleyball, basketball, football, wrestling, cheerleading, goodness. And that's where the pride comes in. It's where they don't want to change it. It's part of the Valley's history. It's part of their, it's part of their lineage. They want to keep it.
I get the impression that with the board members, that we sometimes tend to look at people who are in a political role, and I guess school boards are a little less political than some other positions, but we tend to be a little cynical and think that they're all looking over their shoulders, thinking, "How can I hold this seat? How can I advance, etc." But I'd like to think that a lot of them, they've come from the community too, and a lot of them have some strong attachments to the name as well.
A few of them do, but some of them play a political game. If I vote to keep the Redskin name, how can I keep people happy when it comes time to vote on gender-neutral bathrooms? I've got to play my cards right. I've got to hedge my bets. It's also a political game.
Has the character of the Valley changed that much? I would guess that probably in the 1970s and 80s, it was fairly standard in conservative, traditional ways, if not necessarily a political conservatism, but just a social conservatism. Has it changed drastically over the last couple of decades?
I don't see it. This battle's been turned into us against them. Native Teton Valley people versus move-ins, and I'm a move-in. I moved there in 1996 because I'm a Redskin by marriage, and I see the changes. We now have two stoplights in town. That was huge. We have a grocery store that sells beer and wine, but they won't open on Sunday. There is more of a progressive agenda. You can see it in the teaching at the school. We just had a teacher retire this year that wouldn't fly the U.S. flag or stand during the pledge. He raised the flag of a foreign country in his room, and that's what it was. It has become quite a bit more progressive and liberal, but I guess that's what you get when you're paying teachers, $27,000 less a year than what they're getting 30 miles away over Teton Pass.
Yeah. I want to mention, if you're just tuning in today, we're speaking with Doug Wilson, and he is a parent in the Teton school system, and we're speaking about last night's board meeting where there was no decision by the board on the use of the name Redskins going forward. And of course, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 60. Bill Colley with you. And coming up, we're just shy of 8:51. Referencing this meeting, there's got to be a decision, I would think, soon, because if you suddenly decide against the name, there have to be some changes made in signage and in uniforms, and any number colors may not change, but there's got to be a lot of change made, and there's a very short window now between here and the beginning of the school year.
There is, and there's also a very short window between now and when we elect 3 new board members. After last night, I think they get a feeling of the pride for and the desire to change. It's a pretty big pot at this point. I wouldn't be surprised to see this go past the election day and into next year, so that fresh board members and maybe they can get maybe the current 3 that are up for a re-election or whatever they choose to do can be out of the spotlight.
Did last night's meeting maybe give those board members an indication of where the public mood is, enough to the point where they might realize that if you vote for the name change, A, you either keep your job, or B, you lose that position?
Well, we don't pay our school board members. It's a purely volunteer. So if they lose the job, it may be a little bit of loss of status, but it's not a loss of income. That's for sure. But it was brought to their attention that we live in this valley, we vote in this valley, we own land in this valley, and we pay taxes in this valley. We're the ones you have to listen to. As nice as it is to be a good neighbor, the Shoshone-Bannock tribe and tribal council do not pay taxes in our valley. They do not pay for the schools. They don't pay for the $37.5 million worth of construction we have going on at this point. The people in the valley and the voters and the landowners do.
What would be your gut feeling if it does go to a public referendum versus the board deciding? Do you have any idea of what you might see as a percentage of how this would go and which side would prevail?
As a percentage is how it would go. Every poll out there, eliminating the Washington Post and Annenberg poll, which holds at 90-10, generally goes between 67% for the name, 33% against, to 75-25. That's just the national average. Every time you do a poll, that's what you see. We had that poll at the Shoban Facebook page, 72% to save the Redskin name, 28% against. We had 67% to save the name and 33% against through our students in the high school in a poll run by student council. I imagine it would be about the same. We do have a far more liberal vote in our valley. We will, and I think to reach that 67 to 33 or 75-25, we'd have to mobilize voters, because I don't know why we have a problem with voting in the United States, but we have horrible turnout, and we have that in Teton Valley too. But if there's one topic that will get people moving, is the Redskin name.
Because of those associations, obviously, that people have with it for generations.
That's what I asked the school board last night. I was one of the first 10 people to talk. I said, when is the last time you had this many people at a school board meeting? Seriously, when is the last time? I bet it was 2013 when the subject was originally brought up.
I've got to think that we may have reached a high watermark when it comes to political correctness in this country, and that we may be seeing that recede, though. And I wonder if that can also benefit keeping the name.
It absolutely would. At some point, you have to call it like you see it. It's difficult worrying who's going to be offended. I've done my own research in this, as every person with a stake in this battle has, and one of our greatest rivals is Sugar City, the Sugar Salem Diggers. And I even found a web page that said the Shoshone tribe were disparagingly called diggers back in the day because they foraged for roots.
Somebody's trying to stretch this a little bit, aren't they?
It's 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 scary. You have to choose to be offended by a name, and with all the problems that are had in the white people's world and in the Native American world, why are we worried about a word?
Yeah, I'd like to think that if this thing can be put to bed through a public vote, and that you may not have to deal with it ever again, in the the next couple of lifetimes, uh, and yet I just after I guess that they've in Cedar City they completely folded on this issue, although it cost some people their political careers, at least for now. Uh, it's tough sometimes to predict which direction these things are going to go.
You're absolutely right. In Cedar City, there are still people fighting to expose the method that was used to change that name. I think we have quite a bit less of that going on here, but it's it's going to be a battle. It will never. Even if the Redskin name wins this time, all it takes is one person to stand up in another school board meeting and say, "Hey, we think this is offensive," and it never goes away. The only way for this to happen is to put it to a vote, on a ballot, with the terminology that when state funding is terminated because of our name to our schools, we will talk about this again. And until then, the decision's made.
Well, Mr. Wilson, I want to thank you much for your time again today, and obviously next week's going to be very telling on all of this, and perhaps we might be speaking again sometime soon.
Love to speak again with you, Phil. That'd be great.
All right. Take care, sir, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Doug Wilson joining us this morning. And of course, as I said earlier, he has children still attending school in Teton district. And he had another son recently graduated. But as he points out, his family has 3 generations at least who've graduated from there and were known as Redskins while they were in attendance at the school. And this issue's not going to go away, obviously, quietly. Although, as he pointed out, a public vote at least would perhaps be the fairest way to deal with it. We've got a break coming up. We've got one more hour still ahead of News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Well, actually, we got 24/7 of it, don't we? Well, one more hour of Magic Valley this morning following the news.